When you pull the trigger on a machine gun for the first time, you're going to have one of three reactions, guys. Either one, you'll freeze like a deer in the headlights, or two, you'll laugh out loud, or three, you'll scream like Howard Dean. If you're planning on owning a gun with a fun switch, then there are a couple things you need to know. I have in front of me an article called Buying and Owning Full Autos, which appears in the latest issue of Rifle magazine. The author is firearms historian Mike Venturino. Mike joins me on the phone. Mike, thanks for calling.
Thanks for having me here.
Mike, we need to start with some definitions. Anytime there's a mass shooting, it becomes readily apparent that this country's politicians either don't know the difference between full auto and semi-auto, or else they're deliberately obscuring the difference for propaganda effect. Help us clear this up.
I think it's a combination of stupidity and corruption. That's my take on it.
Okay, so Mike, what is the difference between semi-auto and full auto?
Semi-auto is you pull the trigger once, the gun fires once. Machine gun, full auto, is you pull the trigger back, hold it back, and it fires until you let it up.
So the machine gun then is synonymous with full auto.
Right.
All right, and so the single trigger pull, that would be something like the AR-15, and the one trigger pull with multiple rounds coming out, that would be the AR-15 look-alike, the M16.
That's absolutely correct.
All right, so the bolt-action hunting rifles are not full auto or semi-auto.
That's correct. They're bolt actions.
Meaning that you would have to pull the trigger and then eject it manually, eject the shell. Okay.
You have to manipulate the bolt for every shot.
Now, Mike, there's a couple other terms that we hear thrown around that we need to clarify. What's the difference between a machine gun and a submachine gun?
Okay, the machine gun is generally a crew-served weapon. It takes several people to manipulate it to get it into action. You have a gunner, assistant gunner, and then you have people carrying extra ammo because they go through so much. A submachine gun is a personal weapon carried by one person, used by that one person. Generally speaking, a submachine gun fires pistol-sized cartridges. Machine guns fire rifle-sized cartridges.
All right, so an AK-47 would fire a rifle-sized cartridge, and then the famous Tommy gun of the 1920s and also of World War II fame would fire the pistol cartridge. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. The AK, the AR, they use a mid-level rifle cartridge. They're not actually a pistol cartridge, but they're not a full-sized rifle cartridge. It was discovered in World War II that most shooting was done under 400 yards, so the full-size rifle cartridges quickly fell out of favor.
Mike, we're not living in the 1920s when anybody could walk into a hardware store and buy a Tommy gun for $200 with no questions asked. But according to the article that we're referring to, we still can own machine guns provided we jump through some hoops. Let us know what some of those hoops are.
Okay, the most important one, you need to live in a state which allows them, because state laws are different from federal laws. For instance, here in the West where I live, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Oregon, they're legal to own. California and Washington, they are not legal to own.
So you can own them in the red and purple states, but definitely not the blue states out west.
Exactly, again.
You know, I'm kind of surprised that Oregon allows that. That must be the eastern part of the state that's influencing that.
I'm afraid with the politicians they have over there right now that things may change, but maybe this isn't important enough for them to address it. Hopefully not.
Mike, can you get a machine gun, a full auto, from any dealer?
Absolutely not. A dealer has to have a Class 3 license, and that means they can deal in full autos, short-barreled rifles, i.e. those with barrels under 16 inches, and suppressors, which most people call silencers.
Mike, there's a number of situations you outline in the article in which a person could get a full auto from a licensed dealer. So let's look at hypothetical situation number one. My local Class 3 dealer has a full auto Uzi on display, and I want to buy it. Do I just hand over the cash?
No. you may have to hand over the cash you in the beginning, but what you do is you fill out a Form 4. Now, this isn't a license. This is just a form to register that gun with the federal government. And on the Form 4, you put the serial number, the caliber, the name of the full auto or silencer, whatever, the address of each party, and the seller's Class 3 license number. Along with that, you've got to have a passport quality photo. And the one stumbling block I've heard of is that it has to be signed by the chief law enforcement officer where you live. Now, if you live inside a city limit, it has to be the chief of police. If you live outside the city limit, it has to be the sheriff.
Now, tell me about the fees. I'm always hearing about the $200 fee and this tax stamp. Can you clear that up for me?
Okay, the $200 fee actually buys you a stamp, a real stamp, looks just like a postage stamp. But that stamp goes on the Form 4 for the $200 fee, and it's a one-time deal. Many people say, oh, you have to pay that every year. No, it's a one-time deal. And that goes on the Form 4, and then when the Form 4 goes back to your Class 3 dealer, he hands it and the machine gun over to you.
Mike, the $200 fee, do you have to pay that with each full auto that you buy, or is that just one time for all?
No, one time per gun. And it should be stressed, too, that just because you bought one and got the Form 4, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to get the next one. You have to fill out all the paperwork just the same, and even with the fingerprints, and send it in each and every time you buy a full auto.
Mike, let's look at hypothetical situation number 2. I'm surfing the internet, and I'm on a site where they are licensed to sell NFA products like full autos and suppressors, and I see an M16 that I want to buy. Not sure where I would have an extra $30,000, but let's just say. All right, how do I buy that M16 off the internet?
Okay, well, let's assume that M16 is owned by a dealer. Your dealer in your state has to have that gun shipped to him, and then you go through the same paperwork that I just described if you were buying that gun originally from that dealer. Dealer to dealer, there's no fees for them. They just have to do some federal paperwork, but then it comes to your dealer and then to you. And there is a difference here that should be mentioned, because I was ignorant of it until I started buying these things. But if you are dealing with a dealer, Class 3 dealer in another state, and you have an FFL or a CNR, Curio and Relics license, that dealer can ship that gun right to you, to your door.
And FFL stands for?
Federal Firearms License. But the Curio and Relics license can, anybody who qualifies, doesn't have a record or a felony, can have a Curio and Relics license, and then the gun can actually be shipped straight to their door. Excuse me, I should add, if it qualifies as a Curio and Relics, which means it has to be 50 years old or older.
Mike, let's move on to situation number 3. The next-door neighbor has a 1921 Thompson submachine gun, and I've been coveting that for years. Can I just walk over with a suitcase full of $100 bills and do a transaction like that?
Actually, no. You can buy it from him directly. My first gun, my MP40, came that way. But he has to obtain the Form 4s from the ATF website, and you fill out 2 of them just like he was a dealer, do all the paperwork just like I said in the beginning, and then send it in. When the Form 4 comes back to him, then he can call you. You can walk next door, take your gun and the Form 4 and go home.
Mike, I think the long and the short of all that we've been discussing is there is zero probability of anonymous ownership of machine guns in this country. There's no such thing as a free-range machine gun.
Not a legal one.
Right, and therefore there would be zero possibility of a legally owned machine gun being used in a crime unless somehow it had been stolen.
Again, you're perfectly correct. And in my research, I've only found 3 times that a legally owned machine gun has been used in a crime. All 3 were stolen.
And that's 3 crimes since when?
1934.
1934. And that's a rather signal date when it comes to full autos. What happened in 1934, Mike?
FDR, because of the newspapers covering the gangs and crime so much in the early 30s, the newspapers got people scared of full autos. FDR got the National Firearms Act passed in 1933. It took effect in 1934, and that's why suppressors, short-barrel rifles, short-barrel shotguns, full autos are under federal control.
And just so we have a little bit of historic perspective, Prohibition ran from 1920 to 1933, and that's when the Tommy gun became infamous. And so 1934 was right on the tail end of that era.
That's correct, yes.
Mike, now that our hypothetical guy, through one of those 3 methods we discussed, has become a proud machine gun owner, he has yet more rules and regulations to navigate. Tell us more about the Form 4.
Well, the Form 4 always has to be with the gun or a photocopy of it. Like I have taken guns to put up a display at gun shows. I take the paperwork with me. I've never had anybody ask to see it, but it always has to be there. And that gun needs to be under your control the full time. Now, times I've taken them to gun shows, I take them home with me at night or to the room where I'm staying at night. I do not let them out of my possession.
Now, some of these World War II submachine guns you own, they're relics of history. People, when they see them, are going to want to handle them. Are other people allowed to handle them at the gun shows?
Oh, yes. They can handle them, and I can allow people to shoot them at a legal shooting range or on my own property, but I cannot have them out of my presence.
All right, so you have to be there in person as well as the Form 4.
That's correct.
Right. I'm aware that your publisher also owns a full auto, and every time we've taken that out for a spin, he's got the paperwork right there in the case along with all the empty magazines.
In fact, since I have 9 full autos, I have all their paperwork in a folder, and it stays in the tool kit that goes with me whenever I take one out the door.
Mike, let's say that our hypothetical gun owner lives in Oregon, and he wants to take his gun to a show in Arizona. Can he cut through California on his way to Arizona?
No way. You cannot take them into a state where they're not allowed.
And so, Mike, when you come down to the Columbus Day shoots here in Arizona, or when you come down for any other event here in Arizona, how do you get here from Montana? What's your route?
I go to Interstate 15, follow it down to southern Utah, cross over to, I don't remember, to Kanab, Utah, and then straight on down to Flagstaff and Prescott, Arizona. But I have to have another piece of paper with me besides my Form 4, and that's called Form 5320-20. On it, you have to list your route, where you're going, the reason why you're going, and where you're going to be staying.
And so if Nevada or Utah suddenly decided that they were no longer going to allow full auto ownership, that would put a dent in your route, and you would have to make it even more circuitous to get here.
That's correct.
Mike, it looks like there's quite a few hassles that one has to deal with when owning a full auto. Owning a full auto, of course, can be a real joy. I mean, the times that you've brought down the machine guns that you own to Prescott, and we've shot them on the Columbus Day shoots, it's been a real blast, pun intended. But there are some reasons why a person might not want to own a full auto. Obviously, Mike, you and I support the right of law-abiding citizens to own machine guns, but let's look at some of the reasons why people would not. For one, I was cruising some of these Class 3 websites before the interview, and I'll just put it like this. You can either buy a Learjet or you can buy 2 machine guns.
That's right on the money. As a matter of fact, for my Thompson, my M1 Thompson, I paid the same amount for it as Yvonne and I paid for our first house after we got married.
No comment. Mike, you've also written a book on World War II, and in this book, you indicated that in order to purchase the World War II era firearms that you documented in that book, you had to sell off 50 of your other guns in order to be able to foot the bill.
That is exactly right. And sometimes I look back on it and regret it, but most times I don't. I enjoy having these pieces of history.
Mike, what is causing these incredible prices on these guns?
Well, they skyrocketed after 1986 when the federal government passed a law that no new full autos could come into the system. And that kind of put the limit. I think the number is around 180,000 legally owned machine guns in the country. There can be no more, ever.
So when we're at the range and we see somebody with a full auto, we have to assume that the age of that gun is 1986 or older.
That is correct, yes. I should stress this. No new ones can enter the Form 4 registry. New guns can only come in to dealers or people with special occupation tax stamps. And those people are the ones who sell to police departments or paramilitary organizations, etc., like that. They cannot ever go onto a Form 4 and be owned by a common civilian.
And because these guns are now about 30 years old, they are simply becoming scarcer and scarcer, hence the incredible price rises.
I had a chance to buy an MP40 in 1990 for a tenth of what I paid for the one I own now.
Mike, now that we've talked about the prohibitive prices, the travel restrictions, and the whole show me your papers thing, I want to talk about something else that you discussed in your article, and that is that there is also a certain level of harassment that accompanies machine gun ownership.
Yes, if you take these things out onto public land, for example, and shoot, you had better be prepared that someone will call the police, because the common thought among the unknowing is that it's illegal to have a machine gun. It is not, as we've just discussed. But the police have to respond. Now, here on my private land, I've never had anybody come and check because the sheriff and several of the deputies are personal friends. But a friend who owned an M16 and took it prairie dog hunting, he had to answer to responses from sheriffs several times. He finally got frustrated and sold the gun. Another thing they need to consider is that many public ranges do not allow full autos. So before buying one, I would be certain of a place where I could actually use it. There's nothing like selling or buying a $15,000, $20,000 gun and then find out you can't shoot it.
And it's important to stress, too, that even the ranges that allow one to shoot full autos have different rules and regulations. For example, I used to go to a gun range in Georgia. They had a full auto MP5 and an M4 that you could rent there. And it was just like renting a revolver or a semi-automatic handgun. You would hand over your credit card and your driver's license. He would just hand you the gun over the counter. You would go back around to the range, load up your own magazines, and shoot away. But there's a range that I went to here that also rents an array of full autos, and they go back there and babysit you the whole time you have the gun on the range.
Many of them, I think, it's the insurance matter. That's the reason they want to babysit you. I would not turn my back on somebody that was firing my full autos here on my own property. I watch them like a hawk.
Mike, the fear that I think that a lot of people have about machine guns is they fear that these are going to be used in crimes. Now, Mike, using a legally owned machine gun for home defense would probably not be something we would recommend.
I agree 100%. There's far better guns to use for home defense, like just about any pump-action 12-gauge shotgun. You don't want to turn a string of bullets loose in some setting where they might get away from you. As I've heard said, there's a lawsuit attached to every bullet you fire. Unless
you're an illegal alien living in San Francisco, of course.
Of course, that's such a disappointment.
So, Mike, let's say that a machine gun owner became enraged at his neighbor and decided that he wanted to riddle him with bullets. There would be no way he could get away with that, because when the police show up to look at the crime scene and the body has 14 bullets in it and there's an additional 16 bullets in the wall, obviously they know he's been sprayed with a machine gun. Then all they have to do then is look at the empty shells on the floor. Oh, look, this is only fired in certain machine guns like the PPS H-41. So then they look in their records to see who in the city owns those machine guns, and very soon they've got it narrowed down to the perpetrator.
I just don't see how it could happen under anything but the most unusual circumstances.
Mike, some of your friends in the Wild West shooting and the black powder community have accused you of going to the dark side.
You know, I really find that offensive. I can make a joke about it, but I find it offensive because my whole thing as a writer, and I've written over 2,000 magazine articles now, all about firearms, is that I like historical guns. And I don't care if they're Civil War historical or World War II historical. I find them fascinating. So there's no dark side to it. I'm a historian.
Mike, I'd really like us to emphasize that angle, because you brought a number of these World War II firearms down for us to shoot. And not only is it fun just to shoot any machine gun, but it was especially fun to be holding these guns that were in the hands of the greatest generation when they were saving the world.
That's the way I feel too, Paul. I was born in 1949, and World War II was a big influence on me growing up. My uncle had been a Marine in the Pacific. Most men of military age had been involved in it one way or the other. The movies, almost every week there was a new World War II movie. I find it probably the most interesting time in history. And something that's very interesting is that many GIs snuck back foreign relics, souvenirs, trophies. And those are coming out of the woodwork some now. And it would be nice if the government would declare an amnesty for widows and whoever, that they could actually sell legally these very expensive guns that their husbands had hidden in the attics for 50 years or 60 years.
Would there be any chance of those coming onto the market through the civilian marksmanship program?
No, I think not. All of them have been held illegally, the ones I'm talking about. In fact, in 1968, there was a 90-day amnesty where if you had an unregistered machine gun, you could walk into your ATF office and they would write you out, I guess, a Form 4, and you could own it legally thereafter. In fact, one of my machine guns has the paperwork showing that it was done that way. And if they did that again nowadays, I think a lot of widows or heirs would come out of the woodwork with stuff that their World War II veteran fathers and grandfathers brought home.
Ladies and gentlemen, the name of the article was Buying and Owning Full Autos. The author was Mike Venturino. Mike, it's been great talking with you.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.